This video is a continuation from our last teaching lesson on Twitch. So once you have your stitches on here, when you first pick up your needle, the stitches may all be twisted on here. It may look like this, where they're all twisted around the needle. So scooch all your stitches around so that all the little knots are on the same line, so that the knots are under the needle and all the loops are on top of the needle. Okay, so now we're going to start knitting. So what you want to do, you want to make sure that as you start grabbing your knitting to start knitting, you don't want to knit with the tail. You're going to knit with the yarn that goes back to the ball. So if your tail is too long, go ahead and cut your tail. Leave it to be about 6 to 8 inches and then cut it so that it's not very long. You don't want it too short, because you're going to, in your projects, when you're done, you want to have enough tail left over so that you can weave in the ends and it won't keep popping out. So leave enough room, about 6 to 8 inches, and then cut it. So now we're going to start knitting. Are we ready? So what we're going to do, just like when the yarn was on your thumb, just like when it was on your thumb, now there's a loop here on your needle, this very first loop. So we're going to go into it just exactly the same way that you did for when it was on your thumb. You don't know that you did this, but when you were having the loop on your thumb, you were actually knitting the stitch that was on your thumb. You were knitting that stitch, you just didn't know it. So now we're actually going to do the exact same thing, except now the stitches are all on your needle. So you're going to go into the stitch exactly the same way. You're going to go underneath the stitch, and the right hand needle goes from the bottom up, and the right hand needle stays in the back. So you make an X with your needles, and this needle stays in the back. Okay, just like when it was on your thumb. And then you take the yarn that goes back to your ball, and you go behind, and you bring them forward between the two needles, just like when it was on your thumb. And this is the only thing that's just a little bit different. You're still going to take this loop and bring it over the tips, kind of. But what you're going to do is you're just going to slowly use your right hand needle. I'm going to do it real slow, and I'll do it a couple of times. You're going to slowly bring the tip of your right hand needle to go back through the loop. Okay? And once you have the stitch over here on your right needle, then you can let it drop off the left side. Now watch me do it 10 times, okay? You're going to go from the bottom up, make your X, right needle in the back, take your yarn that goes back to the ball and wrap it around behind, bring it forward between the needles, and there's a little hole right here. There's a little hole between the needles, and you're going to very slowly bring your needle through that hole. And then once you have the stitch over here, then you can slide it off the left side. And I'm going to zoom in so you can really see it, okay? You're going to go in from the bottom up, make your X, wrap behind and forward in between the needles, and then there's a little hole. Let me see if I can show you the little hole. It's right here. It's right there. See, there's a little hole right there. That's where you want the tip of your needle to come down through that little hole. And if you watch while I'm doing this, I'm holding my thread, and I'm kind of holding it tight. I'm putting what's called tension on it. Let me show you the reason I put tension on it. When I go into my next stitch, I put tension on it, and I bring it around and in between, and I'm still putting tension on it, means I'm holding it tight. And the tighter I can hold it, the easier it is to bring this stitch through. If I were to let go of the yarn, let me show you. If I were to let go of the yarn right here and try to pull that through, it's really tricky. It's really hard to pull that through. So if you can figure out in your hands how to hold the yarn to put tension on it, and you'll see knitters, some knitters hold the yarn with out here like this. Some people, you know, thread it through their fingers in certain ways. They're doing that to try and figure out for their hands what feels right to put tension on the string. It makes it easier to pull it through the stitch. So you put tension on it at the same time you're pulling it through. Show you a couple more times, and let me show you this too, just for info purposes. The reason you make an X with your needles when you're knitting, it puts the least amount of stretch on your stitch. You don't want your stitches to be super baggy and loopy. So if you were to go into the stitch and then do this, where there is where it stretches out your stitch, that it will make your stitches get loopy. So you want to only do an X. When you do that X, it makes that stitch have the least amount of stretch on it. So you make your X, you come around behind and go in between, and then you pull your stitch through, and then you might have to scooch up your stitches on your left hand needle and let that stitch drop off. So you just go really slow and one stitch at a time, and you just go through each one of the stitches, and what you're doing is you're taking this stitch that's on the left hand needle, you're pulling a loop through the loop, and you're catching it over here on the right needle, and once you have it on the right needle, you can take it off the left needle. So you're transferring one loop from one side to the other side. And you don't have to spend a lot of time tightening your stitches. Let me show you that. You don't have to stop and pull. You don't have to stop and pull the yarn to tighten. It will naturally tighten itself. You're putting tension now on the yarn. When you throw the yarn, it puts tension on the stitch below. So this is tightening it already. So just picking up your yarn and starting the next stitch will tighten the stitch below. So you pull that through, you got your stitch on, you go to start your next stitch, and when you take this yarn to throw it, it will naturally tighten it. So you don't have to spend a whole lot of extra time tightening, if that makes sense. So you go through your whole row and knit all your stitches. Okay, I'm going to have you just practice that. Just practice that part. Just knit, knit, knit. When you get ready to start your new row, you've got all your stitches on the needle. All you do is change hands. You put the stitches on your left needle. You put this. Let me put it this way. The needle with the stitches on it goes in your left hand, and then the empty needle goes in your right hand. And you just start it the exact same way. You go into the very first loop on the needle and then knit that stitch. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you like the video.